I'm very concerned that our society is much more interested in information than wonder, in noise rather than silence.
Fred Rogers, whose loving, prophetic voice is most known in his role as Mr. Rogers on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, observes in 1994 what is even more true today: information and noise. And he wonders,
how do we encourage reflection?
Jesus asks this too. Jesus says he came that we might have life more abundantly, and invites us to pay attention and have the wonder and silence and eyes to see that we might not miss what's really in us and around us, this abundant life that Jesus comes to share. But,
oh my, this is a noisy world.
This is still a noisy world. At Salt House this fall, we come together to make space in the noise for prayer and breath to reflect. Our journey is led by another prophet, Cole Arthur Riley, who dares to ask in her new book, This Here Flesh, how can spirituality not silence the body, but instead allow it to come alive? How can we find peace in a world overtaken with dislocation, noise, and unrest? Cole Arthur Riley is a contemplative, the kind of contemplation everyone can do. Contemplation that is a bridge between our interior and exterior worlds, fully experiencing our bodies, present where we are, and seeing our world and reality as they truly are. The current moment and the last few years have not felt like life and abundance. It has been hard to know what we feel and see and make sense of it all. So each Sunday this fall, we become contemplatives as we open ourselves to the Jesus story and a chapter or two from This Here Flesh. Each one names a theme, a way we come alive, including body, place, belonging, fear, wonder, rage, memory, lament, and liberation. So friends, this fall, do you want to come alive into the abundant life of God that is within you and all around you? Me too. What a gift that we get to contemplate and grow together as we explore ways we come alive.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Arlene, and I am a Salt House member, along with my husband Camron and my twins, Hannah and Eli. And for the last 2 years, I've been studying at both Fuller Seminary and Luther Seminary, and I'm working to obtain the Master of Divinity. And I hope to someday become a hospital chaplain, God willing. And I'm just really happy to be with you all today and to share my story and just what God has been doing in me. And before I start, though, I am going to share our reading today, which is a portion of Psalm 30. And the words in this psalm are meaningful to me because they are connected to my own experience of trauma and transformation. So Psalm 30, verses 8 through 12. To you, Lord, I called. To the Lord, I cried for mercy. What is gained if I am silenced, if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my help. You turned my wailing into dancing. You remove my sackcloth and clothe me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord, my God, I will praise you forever. So this is a psalm about suffering and asking God for rescue. But it is also a psalm of transformation and hope. The rescue in this psalm doesn't come immediately, even though instant mercy is what is being asked of God. At least that's how I interpret it. The rescue of God in this psalm comes from the transformation that God works inside the person in moving the person from suffering to joy. So in our mid-20s, Camron and I, we decided to start a family. And we were really excited to experience just everything that parenthood would bring. But getting pregnant wasn't easy for us, and we had to use IVF to get pregnant. But we did get pregnant, and we were just really thrilled about the prospect of the new life and the bright future that we knew would come to us through the birth of our kids. And then on my 29th birthday, when I was 10 weeks pregnant, I started unexpectedly bleeding, and we thought that we had lost the pregnancy. Instead of going to celebrate my birthday and go shopping for maternity clothes, which had been the plan, I went to the emergency room. And after a 4-hour wait to get scanned, all the while thinking that we had miscarried, it was discovered that they were actually still viable. They were alive. But the unexplained bleeding forced me to start what would become 20 weeks of strict home and hospital bed rest. Unfortunately, despite the bed rest and everything else that we and my medical team did to try to prevent preterm labor, our twins were delivered 10 weeks early at 30 weeks gestation. And for those of you who don't know, a full-term pregnancy is 40 weeks. I was terrified when the kids were born. I feel sad, even to this day, when I think back to their birthday, because there wasn't a single moment of joy or happiness that I experienced the day that they were born. There was only numbness and shock. All the joy that I had anticipated having became lost to me in the moment my water broke. When my daughter was born, she didn't cry, and I got a quick glimpse of her before she was taken up to the neonatal intensive care unit. And she looked so awful in that little glimpse that I thought she had died. And then I delivered my son, and I got to see him for 10 seconds before he was taken up to the NICU. And then I went into recovery alone, as Camron had actually gone up with the kids, which he should have. But as I laid in recovery, I truly believe that one or maybe both had died. And when I first saw them, they survived, but when I first saw them, it wasn't relief that I felt. I felt scared to see them or even touch them. They were covered in wires and equipment, tucked away inside protective plastic isolates, which are just these plastic boxes. And you could only touch them by putting your hands through these holes in the isolates, resting your hands on them, but doing no more, because even just the slightest caress would be overstimulating to their sensitive bodies. They were so fragile that it took 3 days before I was able to hold them. And actually, I'd been avoiding touching them even, and holding them seemed even more terrifying. Though I didn't want to hold them, I was forced to by well-meaning people, including Camron. And I found it was good for me because I started to hope again that everything could be okay. In the first days of their lives, I had lost hope for the future. So after holding them, I started to think about the future again. Then the next day, when the kids were 4 days old, our daughter, she experienced a medical emergency, and she had to be transferred from Evergreen's NICU to Seattle Children's NICU. And we were told that she had 18 hours to live before her heart was going to give out, and they didn't know what was causing her heart rhythm and rate issues. We were told to prepare for her death, as it could be imminent. She was taken in an ambulance to be near to the pediatric cardiologist at Children's. And my frog voice happens when I start crying, so I'm sorry. It might happen this whole time. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. She was taken in an ambulance to be near to the pediatric cardiologist at Children's. And by the grace of God, she survived the event. But afterwards, I was told it was likely to happen again because they didn't really know why it happened in the first place. Watching her come so close to death and then being told it would likely occur again without any explanation destroyed the remnants of hope that I had for the future. Because no one could guarantee that she or our son would be okay or that ultimately I was going to be okay. The kids eventually discharged from the NICU, but being at home was much harder than being in the NICU. Our early years were not filled with joy, but with medical isolation, where they could not be around others or in public spaces, doctor and specialist appointments, surgeries, numerous therapies from PT, OT, speech-language pathology, feeding therapy, and we lived under the constant threat of rehospitalization. We were surrounded by people who supported the medical and developmental needs of my kids, which was a wonderful gift. And that was both in the NICU and at home. Yet, despite being surrounded, I felt extremely alone and isolated. I've never felt more alone in my life than in the time we navigated the NICU and in the handful of years after they came home. I just felt dead inside. I had seen our kids come close to death too many times, and it had wrecked me. Worse, I felt that no one understood my suffering. Not my friends, family, or even Camron. Social media didn't exist, so couldn't find a support group or any place that could help me. My suffering was made worse because in my mind, I felt I suffered alone. And I was so lost even to myself that I couldn't sense the presence of anyone else around me. And I especially felt abandoned by God because no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't discern his presence. I wanted God to tangibly reveal himself and immediately take everything away that was upsetting for me. The God of miracles can do this. He can give instant healing, right? But when I cried out, God didn't answer. God didn't reveal himself to me, and I couldn't sense his presence. And this was, as I understood it, because he had abandoned me. Was I sad about his absence, though? Nope. I was angry. I was livid. I was very angry because God, I felt he had just been absent to me in my darkest moments. And in those moments when I often thought, I just can't do this anymore, I would find myself praying the Lord's Prayer because I couldn't think of anything else to say to God. I have very stark memories of praying that prayer in the times that I felt the most abandoned by God. But I didn't pray it to honor God. In using that prayer, I channeled all the anger I felt and every accusation I made against God for being absent. It gave me something to say to God when there were no other words to say, because all I had left in my shell of a self was anger. Ultimately, I was angry with God because in my season of crisis, I had stayed faithful to God, but God had not been faithful to me. These feelings of isolation and abandonment became part of my everyday life, and they didn't leave me. I remember once saying to Camron, I'm just an angry person now. The joyous and happy person I had been before was dead. I was full of anger and all the things I didn't want to be. But it was who I felt I had become. Yet, I still hoped for joy. And when the kids were 15 months old, they reached a milestone where they were able to graduate from two things at the same time. feeding therapy, and medical isolation. But instead of feeling joy like I had expected when we would reach that finish line, I felt devastated, and for 3 days, I found I couldn't stop crying. I realized that something was wrong, and I contacted a counselor that worked with parents of special needs kids, and she diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. Having a PTSD diagnosis was very unexpected. I had been suffering from nightmares, intrusive flashbacks, hypervigilance, avoidance, isolation, anger, and my heart and mind had been constantly, endlessly filled with thoughts about death and dying and how it would come for my kids. No matter what I did, I just couldn't stop seeing the traumatic things that I had seen being replayed for me on repeat in my mind like an old videotape just being looped over and over. Learning from my counselor that my symptoms of PTSD were completely normal was the most incredibly freeing experience because I learned I wasn't going insane like I'd come to believe, but that I was having a normal reaction to having been traumatized. After my PTSD diagnosis, I wondered if I had changed and was forever going to be an angry and traumatized person, because it felt like it had become my new identity. But anger and trauma wasn't who I was going to be forever, not according to God. God didn't leave me there stuck in that pit. God started to heal and transform me, something I just couldn't do alone. Transformation was a slow and lumpy process. Healing first started when I admitted I needed help and sought out counseling. At my first therapy session, I cried so hard and uncontrollably that I couldn't even get my story out. I just paid for a crying session. My tears and cries choked my words and made it impossible to speak. It took me many therapy sessions before I was able to tell my story, at least the parts that I could face. But as I started to tell my story more, to my counselor, to friends and family, and to others around me, I found I could slowly share more about what had happened. And today, by the grace of God, I can tell all of my story, even the darkest and most terrifying parts that I once couldn't face. Today, I do not live with the daily symptoms of PTSD as I once did. Gone are the nightmares, the flashbacks, hypervigilance, the isolation, the avoidance, and the anger that I felt. Gone are the constant thoughts about death and dying. And gone is the blame that I carried, both for myself and for others who I felt had contributed to my distress. My daily thoughts and my heart no longer carry trauma and suffering anymore. My daily thoughts and my mind and my heart are clear. Where there was once only death and dying, isolation and trauma, pain and suffering, God has helped me to clear these away so that in their place, He could plant something new and wonderful, life, joy, and peace. And I feel full of this life, joy, and peace. Though my mind and my daily thoughts and my heart have experienced transformation, the truth is I still have a lot of traumatic memories that have not been transformed, which is why you see this. I can still see them when I close my eyes. I've been tormented by these memories, and they take my breath away. My memories still accuse God of His absence, and they still tell me that I was alone and abandoned. These memories show me that I still need the God of the resurrection, the God who makes life come from death, to work transformation, freedom, and healing into me. It is through my faith and trust in the promises of God and the evidence of how He has already worked in me that I know that without any doubt, that the pain and trauma in my memories will not have the last word. Suffering will not ever have the last word in my life. The God of the resurrection, who makes all things new, will work in me until every last memory no longer holds pain. And God has already started this healing and transformation in my memories. I wish it could go a lot faster, but it has begun. And God graciously showed me that he had been with me in my time of suffering, even when I thought he'd abandoned me. In my crisis, I had spent time looking for God as the all-powerful one of magical miracles who could fix everything and make things instantly better, just like that. I had looked everywhere for him, this God of power and might. When he and his rescue didn't come, I thought it was because he had abandoned me. It took me a long time, and in fact, many years, to see how God had really been present to me in that time of my life. Rather than being a God of power and might, the God of suffering had been the God who had been near to me. I just never recognized his presence because I never looked for the God of suffering. God showed me that every time I had prayed the Lord's Prayer, accusing God of his absence, the suffering and crucified Christ had himself prayed together with me, that he had been the God who had been with me all along. Every time I'd screamed, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was Jesus sitting next to me in the dark who'd given me his own words from the cross. In my darkest moments, when I'd felt utterly alone and abandoned, the abandoned and broken God of the crucifixion had been very, very near to me inside my own brokenness. The cross is where the God of suffering drew near to all humanity. And it is the place where God drew near to me, even when I just had too many tears in my eyes to recognize his presence in my pit of suffering. But God is not just the God of suffering. He's also the God of the resurrection, who makes all things new by transforming them. The God of the resurrection is the one who has been working in me for years to transform the trauma I experienced and free me in ways that I couldn't free myself. God has not only been transforming my mind, heart, and memories, but he has also been transforming my desires and dreams. Before the birth of our kids, I had worked as an electrical engineer and in information technology. I had planned to put my kids into daycare to focus on my career after the kids were born. After their early birth and everything that happened, God awakened a desire in me to be present to my kids, so I became a stay-at-home mom to care for them. He also gave me a heart for other suffering parents, and for the last 10 years, I've been supporting preemie and NICU parents as a volunteer in the hospital setting and through a regional parent support group that I created and co-lead. The heart God gave me for others has led me to my seminary studies to pursue hospital chaplaincy so that I can someday be present to suffering others and offer them spiritual care and companionship in the worst moments of their lives. God has changed my desires and dreams, and he has given me a passion and calling to care for others. God has long been transforming me to find freedom and peace in the yoke of Christ, freeing me from a yoke of trauma and death. The healing and freedom that I am describing that happened and continues to happen in my life is not just for me alone. The freedom and peace that I have in Christ is for you, just as it is for me. God is working transformation in all of you. It might feel slow, this transformative and healing work of God, but God will work in you until you are free too. You too, like in Psalm 30, will one day be free from sackcloth and wailing. And you too will one day move into dancing, joy, and the singing of praises. To all of you, especially those who are suffering or traumatized, please don't lose hope. Even when there are so many tears in your eyes and you can't see anything but your pain, know in your heart and mind that pain, suffering, and trauma will not ever have the last words in your lives, not according to God. The God who took on the suffering and pain of the world and died to it is near, even when you cannot see him. And the God of the resurrection, who made life come from nothingness and death, is the same God who is at work inside of you, working transformation and healing into your lives, working to write life, joy, and peace, not just into your heart and mind, but also into your memories, desires, and dreams. And before I end, I should share that my kids are doing great today. And I thought this picture was appropriate with Advent coming soon. I share this especially for the preemie parents out there, to show them a picture of my 30-weeker preemie twins visiting Santa. No one would guess by looking at my kids how difficult their early years were. They are living miracles. They have a bright future ahead, full of hope. And Camron and I are doing great too, and our future holds a lot of shiny brightness as well. We are deeply grateful. And I am grateful that you have listened today to my Salt House story.